Hey guys, welcome to Advanced Kids, where we're all about teaching children the heart of God, the Word of God, and the character of God. I hope that you've absolutely loved our series, Elected by God. Part of our series, God's Freedom Timeline, where we've been talking all about the people that God elected and selected to set His people, the Israelites, free. Today is our final session of Elected by God, where we're talking about the one and only Queen Esther. We finished talking about the judges, the prophet Samuel, about our kings that were Saul, David, and Solomon, and this week we're going to talk about the beautiful Queen Esther, who was used by God to save her people, the Israelites, from exile. So why don't we jump in and learn a little bit about Queen Esther and why she was so special to us and God. Have you ever learned anything about Queen Esther? Who was she? She was a beautiful young Israelite girl. She was Jewish and she was a part of the world in a time where kings would choose their wives from wherever they wanted. She ended up married to a king named Xerxes. The way that this happened is that Xerxes was having a party and he asked his wife if she would come and join him. But his wife was just so over it all that she refused. She said no, and after that, King Xerxes exiled her. He didn't want to have anything to do with her anymore, so he decided it was time to choose a new wife. He asked all of the beautiful maidens from around the city that they were from to come in and to meet him so that he could choose the one that he thought should be his wife. He chose Queen Esther. He thought that she was so beautiful and kind and soft-spoken that he wanted her to be his wife. Esther was absolutely amazing. She did everything that she was supposed to. She followed all of the rules until her uncle Mordecai came to her and said, "Your people, the Jews, are about to be taken and exiled and killed by your king, King Xerxes." They asked her to be brave and strong and courageous and go to the king. Back in those days, if you went to the king without being asked for a visitation, then you could be killed on the spot. So Esther was afraid. She didn't know what to do, but she decided that God's will and saving her people was the most important thing. So she did. She went to see King Xerxes, and instead of being mad, he welcomed her with open arms. And she ended up being able to free and save her people. Isn't that absolutely amazing? All it took was a small amount of bravery from Queen Esther, and she stopped the unspeakable from happening. Why don't we jump in and watch this video with a little bit more information about how amazing Queen Esther was, and then we can talk about how we can be more like her as believers.
Slapstick Theater, Esther's Request to the King. This is Esther, who was a Jewish orphan who lived in Persia during the reign of King Xerxes. Esther was adopted by her relative, Mordecai, who worked in the palace of the king. Once, Mordecai had even saved the king's life. Esther became the queen of Persia, but no one knew she was a Jew because Mordecai told her to keep it a secret. This is Haman, who was the second most powerful man in Persia. Haman hated Mordecai because Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him. So Haman convinced King Xerxes to make a decree to kill all Mordecai's people, the Jews. When Mordecai learned about this, he was very upset, as were all the Jews in Persia. When Queen Esther's servants came and told her about how upset Mordecai was, she sent one of her servants, Hatak, to go to Mordecai and find out what was troubling him. So Hatak went out to Mordecai, and Mordecai told him of the plan to kill God's people. Mordecai said that he wanted Esther to go to the king to ask for him to save the Jews. Esther knew that anyone who went to the king without being called could be put to death. But Mordecai reminded Esther that she may have been made queen for such a time as this. So Esther asked for the Jews to pray for her and fast for 3 days. Then Esther put on her royal robes and went before the king. When the king saw Esther, he was happy to see her and asked, "What do you want, Queen Esther? I will give it to you, even if it's half the kingdom." So Esther asked the king if he and Haman would come to a banquet that she had prepared for them, and the king agreed. Esther held a banquet and then asked the king and Haman to come to a second banquet the next night. That night, the king was reminded of how Mordecai had once saved his life. King Xerxes decided that he must honor Mordecai and that Haman would help. Then, at the second banquet, Esther told the king about the plot against her people. The king was angry and asked, "Who would do such a thing?" Esther said it was Haman, and the king ordered Haman to be killed on that very night. But the decree to kill all the Jews was still in place, and the Jews were still in danger. So Mordecai asked the king to issue a new decree so that the Jews could defend themselves. The king did, and the Jews defeated all their enemies. God's people were saved and celebrated their great victory.
Wow, what a brave young woman. I am so impressed with the things that Queen Esther was able to do just by listening to the voice of God and doing what she was called to do from the first place. God called her to be queen so that she could be there in a time to rescue her people. Isn't that absolutely amazing? Now, we find the story of Queen Esther in the Bible, in the book of Esther. And it starts here in Esther 2 verse 9. This is just after she was invited for this big banquet where the king would choose his queen. And it says, "She pleased him and won his favor. Immediately, he provided her with her beauty treatments and special food. He assigned her 7 female attendants selected from the king's palace and moved her and her attendants into the best place in the harem." Isn't that amazing? Not only did he choose her because of her beauty, but he gave her everything that she could possibly desire. And still, she decided that she would be willing to give it all up and even her life to make sure that her people were taken care of. So, this week, how is it that you can choose to be more like Queen Esther? How can we be one of God's elected people to help our people get to know a little bit more about Jesus and do the work of God? I hope that you'll choose this week to be a strong and brave believer, even when it's a little bit scary. Well, that's us for this week. That was our final session of Elected by God, where we've been talking all about the people that God chose to save his people, the Israelites. Why don't you go forward in your life and choose every single day to be elected by God? He chooses every single one of us as long as we say yes to his call, so we can be super strong believers as we continue learning a little bit more about God's people and everything that he's done for our freedom in our series, God's Freedom Timeline. Have an absolutely amazing week, and we'll see you back here next week for a brand new series. See you later.